I was told Grandma had been moved to a nursing facility. That sentence arrived mid-morning, folded into my mother's voice as neatly as a dish towel. She was standing at the sink, rinsing a pan that already looked clean. "They'll take good care of her," she added, as if good care could be poured like water and run down all the sharp places. My father was in his chair with the paper, nodding, the same slow nod he'd used my whole life to keep storms from noticing him. "Which facility?" I asked. "Elmridge," she said. The name sat on the counter between us like a smooth stone that had no particular story to tell. I nodded, the way you nod to a doctor while your pulse quickens under the cuff. I wanted to be the kind of granddaughter who trusted the adults and washed up the teacups. But inside me, a pencil started taking notes on its own. Elmridge. What neighborhood? What room? When can we visit? If you've ever had a moment like that, when a family sentence looks harmless but leaves a splinter, stay with me. And if you're comfortable, leave a note below telling me what tipped you off in your own house. Your stories help more than you think. Grandma wasn't simply a person in our family. She was a temperature. You felt better when she walked into a room. Like the draft stopped and the kettle clicked just in time. She hummed old hymn tunes without words, the way you hum to yourself to remember that you belong to the living. She taught me to cut cinnamon toast corner to corner so it fits the mouth and the day. When thunder rolled in, she'd stand in the doorway and say, "Listen, God turning the pages." So Elmridge should have felt like a blanket. It didn't. It felt like a door quietly closing at the far end of a hall. I asked about visiting. "Soon," my mother said, her eyes holding the shape of no. "They're still doing intake." That night, a smell came through the vent near the pantry. It was faint. Damp cardboard, cold iron, the whisper of old laundry left too long in a machine. Our house had always smelled of coffee and lemon oil. This was new, like a sentence someone had started in the wrong room. I told myself it was the weather, a wet front. In older homes, air finds old paths. Still, I lifted the grate and pressed my face to the darkness. Cool air touched my cheek. Something metallic tapped somewhere below. A polite sound, then silence. I replaced the grate and felt silly. Everyone knows basements make their own weather. The next evening, as the television muttered in the den, I heard a scuff. Not a crash, not a clatter. Just a shoe sole sound. Then, unmistakable, a thin, steady humming. 2 notes, maybe 3, woven of breath and memory. The hair along my arms stood up, foolish and loyal. "Mom," I called. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" She answered, loud enough to cover anything else that might answer with her. "Nothing," I said, and wished that were true. If you're following along, feel free to tap like, so this reaches other readers who know the language of houses. And if a certain hymn tune lives in your bones, tell me which one. I'll hum it in the next chapter for both of us. By daylight, I was reasonable. I took a bus to campus, I bought a sandwich, I answered emails. I even searched for Elmridge on my phone. There was one 2 towns over, another a full hour away. Neither had our zip code. Neither had the kind of waiting list that would have swallowed a sudden admission without a word. When I asked again, casually, which Elmridge, my mother set a cup down too carefully. "Don't fuss," she said. "It isn't good for you." That afternoon, I found one of Grandma's sweaters in the laundry basket, blue with tiny pearls along the collar. The pearls a little off-center, where she'd resewn them herself one winter when the wind had opinions. I lifted it to my face. The scent was her and not her, the soft powder she liked, and beneath it the cool emptiness of a room with the window left open on a bad day. In the evening the smell returned, a touch stronger, wet concrete and pennies. I went to the basement door for no good reason, hand on the knob, listening. The house breathed. The refrigerator ticked. Somewhere deep, a tap. The kind that makes you want to answer so the tapping won't be alone. Is the dryer vent blocked? I asked, making my voice light. It's an old foundation, my father said from his chair, which was not an answer to any question, except the one about what kind of answer he would always give. That night, I dreamed I was small again, my forehead against Grandma's apron, the fabric warm with baking, her voice above me a river of nonsense and comfort. I woke with the taste of flour in my mouth and the certainty that I had forgotten to do something important that had no name. Dawn found the kitchen the way it always did, mild and golden, and I stood looking at the basement door, feeling as foolish as a person can and still tell the truth later. I went down. The first bulb flickered. The second held steady, a weak coin. Our basement was an honest one. Tools on a pegboard, shelves with labeled jars, screws, fuses, washers, old paint cans with dates in my father's small, careful hand. Nothing sinister, nothing out of place except the door at the far end. The little storage room we used for holiday boxes. It had a padlock. We had never, in all my years, locked a door inside our own home. I reached out and touched the brass. It was new enough to be a stranger. Looking for something? My mother's voice came from the top of the stairs. I turned, guilty without a clear crime. The good measuring tape, I lied. Because lies rush in when truth bangs its knee on furniture. Upstairs, she said. You left it by the phone. Oh, I said, and my face felt borrowed. Don't dawdle, she added. And don't go stirring dust you don't intend to sweep. Her footsteps retreated. The lock gleamed. I stood there and promised myself I would not make a story where there wasn't one. Then I promised myself I would not leave a story sealed if there was. If you're my age or older, and many of you are, then you know the ache of keeping the peace. If this is speaking to you, consider subscribing so you can find your way back to the next part. The comments are open for anything you've waited years to say out loud. I began to keep small lists. Not accusations, just evidence. The smell, 7:15 p.m. near the pantry. The hum, late, 2 notes, not the furnace. The lock, daylight, new. A dish in the sink with a tea brown ring and a lipstick mark that wasn't my mother's color. A pair of slippers missing from Grandma's room. The holes in the day where Elmridge should have lived. An address, a phone number, a photo with a plastic bracelet and a cheerful nurse. I started bringing the mail in before my mother could reach it. No bill arrived addressed to a facility. No brochure came with a sticky note that said, "Welcome, Margaret," in a round hand. How nosy, my mother said once, and smiled like a cat. How helpful, I said, and smiled like a person who'd learned to hold a cup steady during an earthquake. The third night, the humming rose again, soft, certain. I sat on the stair midway, where you can go up or down and tell yourself you meant to do either. I closed my eyes. The tune was unshowy, just a comfort thread. Nearer, my God, to thee, or something like it, though Grandma never liked the word nearer. As if he moved, she would say with a half laugh. It's us who do the moving. When the sound faded, the house seemed to fold around the silence as if it were hiding a child. I stepped down the last 3 steps, the way you do when you're trying not to wake anyone. I went to the locked door and pressed my ear against it. The wood was cool. For a long moment, there was only my own breath. Then, no, I thought, I must have imagined that. A whisper of fabric against fabric, like a sleeve shifting. I stood back, heart tripping. I looked at the lock the way you look at your own name in someone else's handwriting. It was mine, and not mine. I went upstairs and made tea. My hands did their remembered work with dignity. My mother, at the table, watched me pour. Did you call Grandma's facility to ask about visiting hours? I asked, as if visits came with weather reports. They'll let us know when she's settled, Mom said. What's the number? I persisted gently. She held my eyes for a breath too long. I'll handle it, she said, which is the phrase people buy when they can't afford the truth. The next day, I searched for the key ring my father kept beside the furnace. his private necklace of small silences. He had 3 rings, one for the cars, one for work, and an old heavy circle for the house that held keys we barely remembered the stories for. I found the house ring on its nail, honest as ever. I took it down and tested a few keys against the basement lock while the dryer thumped like a tired heart, and the minutes tried to convince me to be someone else. None of them fit. I stood in the storage room gloom, the padlock stubborn and clean, and understood something plain. If a key existed, my mother kept it with her. So I did 2 things. First, I started staying home more. I told my friends I was saving money on coffee. I told myself you can't watch a kettle from across town. Second, I became very kind to my mother in the early evenings, the hour when small defenses get dressed in slippers. I volunteered to set the table, to slice the tomatoes, to run out for milk. I took her purse from the hall chair and set it gently by her elbow, and while she buttered, I learned its weight and shape and the sound of its zipper. Grown children in older houses become, without ever deciding, archivists of ordinary sounds. At 8:40 p.m. on a Thursday, while she stepped into the laundry room to switch the load, I slid my hand into the purse and found a small, unfamiliar key in the side pocket, the kind meant for something you wanted to pretend didn't exist. It was not on a ring. It had its own silence. I put it back. I stood still until my skin stopped buzzing. If you're still with me, thank you. Stories told slowly are a gift we give our own hearts. If the pace works for you, gentle, careful, no jump cuts, tap the little heart so I know to keep the rhythm. The house began to feel taller at night. Not bigger, just stretched, like it had decided to show its bones. The stairs creaked exactly where they always had, but each creak rose into the air and stayed there, as if unwilling to settle back down. In the den, my father turned pages a little too noisily. In the kitchen, my mother asked me to keep busy and not hover. When I stood at the sink, I stared at our reflection in the window, the 3 of us framed by the dark like figures in a painting about restraint. Tomorrow, I told myself in the bathroom mirror. Just open the door, see what is true. But the morning brought laundry and errands, and my mother's sudden desire to reorganize the spice rack, which meant I spent an hour with labels and a sponge while my head tried to leave my body and float down to the basement without me. After lunch, she announced a new project. Let's clear out the holiday room. It's been ages. Her voice was cheerful in a way cheerfulness sometimes is. When it's carrying a heavy box, you're not allowed to look inside. My heart beat an odd drum. Sure, I said in my kindest voice. I'll fetch the key. She glanced up too quickly. I have it, she said, and wiped her hands on a towel. She did not go to her purse. She went to the kitchen drawer where we kept takeout menus and warranties. From the back, she produced a small tin, the kind that once held mints you buy at gas stations out of habit. She tapped it against her palm, metal on skin. After you, she said. We went down together like a 2-person procession, my pulse the only music. At the door, she put the key into the lock and turned. The sound was neat and ordinary, as if it had made that sound every day of its life. She opened the door and stood aside. Inside, boxes, a folded card table, a string of lights that had given up, an empty plastic tree stand, the smell of damp cardboard. The bulb swung, casting ovals of light. I don't know what you expected, she said lightly, and her eyes were kind in the way eyes can be when they are not looking at the thing you are looking at. I stood there with my hands hanging at my sides, shamed by the carnival I'd let my mind set up. I began and stopped. If I apologized, I would be wrong forever. If I accused, I would be right too soon. I'll bring up the fall boxes, she said, passing me. Her arm brushed mine. It was warm. We worked for 20 minutes. Leaves made of fabric. A ceramic turkey wrapped in newsprint from 3 Novembers ago. A banner that said grateful in letters that pretended to be wooden. The work was banal, the way work often is when it is guarding something. The hum of the furnace filled the pauses. When I reached for the box nearest the far wall, my mother was there first. "I've got that one," she said, too quick. I let go. Later upstairs, we drank tea out of thick mugs. My father said something about the game. My mother told me she admired my spirit. The house settled its shoulders. That night, I lay in bed listening to the vent breathe. Somewhere in the deep, a thin sound rose. A hum, yes, but hoarse, as if it had caught cold in a room without weather. I sat up. I put my feet on the floor. I went to the hallway and stood still, letting the air tell me its news. Downstairs, a floorboard sighed exactly where a chair might scrape. The smell of wet concrete lifted like a lid. I took the key from the mint tin where I had watched her return it. I held it the way you hold a note you wish had never been sent. I went down the stairs one by one, counting, not to 10, but to who I was when I reached the bottom. At the door, I listened first. The wood was cool against my ear. The humming stopped. A long breath. Then a voice, not the house's voice, not mine. "Sweetheart," it said, careful, as if the air might shatter. My hand found the lock and turned. The key turned with a sound so ordinary it made me furious. Just a small, dry click, like the lock wasn't keeping anything terrible at all. But when I pushed the door open, the air that escaped was heavy and stale, thick with damp stone and something metallic, like coins pressed against wet cloth. The bulb overhead swung on its cord, casting nervous circles of light across the floor. At first, I saw only boxes, a folded table, and a mattress that looked as if someone had tried to make it invisible by shoving it against the wall. Then, in the far corner, I saw her. Grandma. She was seated on a folding chair, her body slumped forward slightly, her hands folded together in her lap the way people do when they're waiting to be called into a room. She wore an old sweater, one I recognized as mine, actually, from years ago. Her hair clung to her head in thin wisps, her slippers gray with wear. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice thin, uncertain, and yet so deeply familiar that it knocked the breath right out of me. I fell to my knees before her. "Grandma! Oh my God!" My words tangled with tears. I reached for her hands, startled at how fragile they felt. Cold, too light. Her face softened, a flicker of relief in her tired eyes. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment. The room was heartbreak in four walls. The mattress was stained, the thin blanket balled at one corner. A bucket stood nearby, the kind used for cleaning, except it wasn't for cleaning. A plastic crate served as a table, where a plate with a crust of bread sat abandoned beside a half-empty water bottle. My stomach lurched. They said you were in Elmridge." She gave a faint smile that almost looked like pity. "I suppose this is Elmridge, then. Elm for the wood of the stairs, ridge for the climb up to the kitchen." "Grandma." My voice cracked. She reached up, her hand trembling but sure, and touched my cheek. "Don't cry. You always cry too much." I shook my head, furious with myself, with everything. How long? How long have they kept you down here?" She shrugged. A slow, tired lift of her shoulders. "Days, weeks, maybe longer. Time isn't the same when the light never changes." I tried to count backwards. When I last saw her, when I last heard her voice upstairs, but my mind stuttered. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "I know," she replied. "But they were afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of losing me," she said simply. Then, after a pause, "Of what people would say if they knew how hard it is." Her words hollowed me out. My parents had chosen shame over dignity, secrecy over compassion. I sat with her until my legs went numb on the concrete. The furnace kicked on, rattling the ducts, covering the silence between us. I noticed the faint marks on the walls where moisture had seeped in. A single cobweb trembled near the light cord, swinging like a witness too frail to testify. "I'll bring food," I whispered. "Something hot. Real. You'll get in trouble." "I don't care." She gave a small smile, the kind she used when I was a child who insisted on climbing too high into trees. "Yes, you do care," she said gently. "You always cared too much. But thank you." That night, I crept back down with a thermos of soup and some crackers. She drank slowly, savoring each spoonful as if it were rare wine. I sat cross-legged on the floor, watching her eat, fury buzzing in my veins. "They told me not to ask about you," I admitted. Grandma chuckled, a soft, tired sound. "That sounds like them. They've always been afraid of the truth having too many witnesses." I stayed longer than I should have. Upstairs, the television muttered. The glow of its light leaked under the doorframe at the top of the stairs. I finally slipped back up, heart hammering, and lay awake all night, the soup thermos still warm against my palms in memory. The days that followed blurred. I went through my routines, class, coffee, errands, while part of me stayed locked in that basement. I began smuggling food daily, an apple tucked into my backpack, slices of bread hidden under my jacket, sometimes leftovers I reheated in the microwave and carried down in bowls covered with foil. Each time, Grandma thanked me as though I'd pulled her from drowning. Each time, the anger in me grew heavier. "Why don't you yell?" I asked her one night, lowering my voice though no one was home. She looked at me steadily. "Because yelling only proves you can still be punished. They'd padlock tighter." Her answer chilled me. Silence had become her survival. At dinner, my parents acted like life was normal. Dad asked me about my classes. Mom commented on the news. I forced myself to nod, to smile, while my throat ached with unsaid words. My spoon clinked against my bowl louder than it should have. "Don't slurp," Mom scolded automatically. The absurdity almost made me laugh. She could critique my manners at the table, while her own mother sat below us with a bucket and a crust of bread. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow. My anger felt like a heavy stone I couldn't set down anywhere. If you've ever lived with a secret so large it pressed against your lungs, let me know in the comments. Sharing even a piece of it might make you feel lighter. At least it does for me. I began to notice the signs of my parents' deception everywhere. A second key that never left my mother's purse. The way she stiffened if I lingered too long near the pantry. The fact that Grandma's slippers had disappeared from the upstairs hall. One Sunday afternoon, while Dad napped in his chair, I dared to search my mother's handbag. My hands shook so badly the zipper caught. Inside, I found the small brass key on its own. No ring, no tag. It gleamed at me like a secret that knew its own worth. I put it back quickly, ashamed and angry at the same time. That night, I held my breath as I slipped it into the lock and turned it myself. The sound echoed in the room like a drumbeat. I had access now. The conversations with Grandma grew longer. Sometimes she hummed, faintly, when she thought I was asleep. Sometimes she told me stories I had never heard. How she and Grandpa first met on a train. How she once worked in a bakery before marriage. How she regretted letting my mother silence her too often. "Your mother always wanted control," she said one evening, sipping soup. "When she couldn't control the world, she tried to control the people in it." "She had no right to do this," I whispered fiercely. "True," Grandma said softly. "But she is also her mother's daughter. Do you know what my mother did to me? She stopped, eyes glistening. "No, another time. I don't want to pass all of it to you." Her words haunted me. Hurt breeds hurt. Silence breeds silence. At night, I began to dream of the basement. In my dreams, the walls pressed closer, the bulb burned hotter, and the hum of the furnace turned into a chant. Do something. Do something. One night, I woke drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:07 a.m. I sat up, listening. The house creaked, then stilled. And in that silence, I realized I couldn't let another week go by. Grandma was fading, her cheeks hollowed, her hands trembled. Even with the food I brought, she wasn't thriving. She was surviving, barely. And I was complicit as long as I waited. If you've ever stood on the edge of a decision and felt your heart hammer like a warning drum, you'll understand this moment. And if this story moves you, a like or a share helps it reach someone else who might need courage tonight. The turning point came on a Friday. My parents dressed up for a dinner with Dad's colleagues, fussing over ties and earrings. "We won't be late," Mom said, as if the warning mattered. The door closed behind them. The silence that followed was enormous, like the house had exhaled. I went to the basement with my backpack slung over my shoulder. "Grandma," I whispered. Her eyes widened at the sight of me with the bag. "What are you doing?" "We're leaving. Tonight." She shook her head weakly. "Oh, child, no. You'll ruin your life." I bent down and clasped her hands. "Better mine than yours." Her lips trembled. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right. I helped her to her feet. Her legs quivered, brittle from weeks of confinement. Step by step, we climbed the stairs together. Each creak sounded like an alarm. Each breath was a countdown. At the top, the kitchen glowed faintly from the light over the sink. I guided her across the floor, the air heavy with detergent and deception. At the side door, I opened it wide. The night air rushed in. Cool, crisp, clean. Freedom. That freedom, though, was fragile. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Mom. "Be home soon. Did you eat?" I shoved it away and half-carried Grandma to the car. My hands shook as I buckled her seatbelt. She placed her thin fingers over mine. "You're braver than I ever was," she whispered. "No," I said, starting the engine. "Just tired of being silent." The headlights cut through the night. I drove, heart pounding, toward the hospital. The emergency entrance glowed ahead like a lighthouse. "We made it," I said, though my voice cracked. Inside, the nurse listened. She didn't gasp, didn't doubt. She simply nodded, already moving, already summoning help. Soon, Grandma was lying in a clean bed under white sheets. A doctor checked her vitals. A social worker asked quiet questions. And me? I sat in a hard plastic chair, hands shaking, waiting. Waiting for my parents to come home to an empty basement. Waiting for the storm that would follow. Hospitals have a way of flattening time. The minute hand moves, but your body doesn't believe it. It's all beeps, soft shoes on linoleum, voices pitched for news no one wants. I sat in a molded plastic chair under a clock that ticked like a nervous animal and tried to swallow my heartbeat. Grandma was behind a pale blue curtain, her breath steadier now, the sheet tucked with the kindness only nurses know. A social worker took notes with a pen that didn't hurry. A young doctor spoke to her in a voice you reserve for elders and children. Clear, slow, unafraid of silence. "You're safe here," he said, and the words put something back into the world I thought we'd spent. Then the officer came. Not with clatter. There's a quiet to real authority. A woman about my mother's age, hair in a practical knot, uniform crisp but lived in. She introduced herself, spoke my name like she'd practiced it once before stepping through the automatic doors. "You brought your grandmother in?" she asked. "Yes." My voice sounded like I'd borrowed it. "Tell me what happened, starting from when you first noticed something was wrong." She didn't open a laptop. She had a notebook, the old kind, paper that listens. I told her about the smell, wet concrete and pennies, how it traveled through the vent like a rumor that had forgotten where it started. The humming, the padlock, the mince tin, the key that clicked too easily. The bucket with a lid that didn't quite fit. The bread crust hardening itself into evidence. I used short sentences because long ones fray when you tug too hard. She let the words stand, like chairs placed where they'd be needed later. Did you confront your parents before tonight? She asked. I shook my head. I brought food. I tried to make it less bad until I could make it stop. My chest tightened with the shape of the confession, that even rescuers first learn to bring soup. She nodded once, an acknowledgement without verdict. You did the right thing by coming here. I wanted those words to be a blanket, but blankets in hospitals are thin on purpose, to layer as needed, not to smother. If you're reading this and wondering whether telling someone is the right thing, I know the door you're standing at. If this story helps, tap the little heart or leave a few words. It may be the nudge someone else needs tonight. The officer asked to speak with Grandma, if she's up to it. She was. She told the truth the way only the very young or very old can, plainly, with small rests to catch the air. It was cold, she said. And sometimes the light swung. I hummed to keep the walls from learning my name. The officer's jaw moved once, a muscle remembering it had work to do. We'll take some photographs, she said gently, of your hands, the room, the lock. She met my eyes again. We'll need access to the house before your parents return. The word parents did a trick in my mouth, bitter and sweet, like a fruit you're not sure is ripe. They texted home soon, I said, and the officer read the text on my phone the way a cartographer reads a coastline. We'll go now, she said. The hospital's nighttime air has its own temperature, almost an outside, almost a church. The male officer joined us in the corridor, younger, soft around the eyes in a way that made me think of new fathers. We'll be quick, he said, and it landed as promise, not threat. We drove in a small convoy, me in my old car that smelled like library books and winter, the cruiser behind me with its steady, unblinking face. The streets knew me, they tried to soothe, but every shadow was a memory practicing its lines. When I turned into our driveway, the porch light came on by timer, an ordinary rectangle of welcome that made my skin go cold. Keys should be simple. Mine wasn't. It snagged as always, and then yielded as always. The door opened on the same soft, lemon-scrubbed air I'd grown up inside. We stepped in like divers, keeping the surface line in view. Kitchen, basement, locked room, I said, and the officer nodded. They moved as if the floor were tired, respectful, deliberate. They didn't prod. They didn't sniff. They documented. The padlock inside the mint tin. The clean circle on the counter where the tin nested like a lie with a coaster. The scuff on the basement step I'd made with my left shoe when I was 11 and carrying a box too big for my pride. The door, the door, the door. The male officer took photos while the female officer watched the house with a stillness that felt like prayer. I'll call this in, she said softly, stepping into the pantry to murmur a few sentences that changed the shape of the night. We were back at the hospital before the hour could think of a way to break me. Grandma was asleep, her mouth a small O of effort. The nurse had braided back the wisps of her hair so they wouldn't tickle her face. I sat. The chair reminded me, creak by creak, that my body had bones. The officer returned to the family waiting room with its floral print as brave as it could manage. We've contacted your parents, she said. We asked them to come here. Here, I repeated, and the word was both balm and blade. Here meant not the house. Here meant witnesses. Here meant that the story would be told in a building where truth had forms to fill and people with clipboards to carry it. Waiting is a profession no one trains for. I tried to drink coffee. It cooled into a dark conviction. I watched the automatic doors. The night shift whispered by in teal scrubs. A volunteer stacked magazines into categories no one would respect. I kept breathing because stopping would have been a choice I couldn't explain to my grandmother later. If you've done a hard waiting, courtroom benches, hospital chairs, the front steps of a house where apologies arrive late, tell me how you pass the time. Over 65 or not, we have this in common. Bodies that need something to do with their hands. They arrived like weather. My mother first, slicing the space with her walk. My father behind, careful, composed. Seeing them in the hospital's clean light made them look like a version of themselves I wanted to save and wanted to warn against. Mom's lipstick was the same color she wore on holidays. Dad's tie had a wrinkle near the knot, as if some small struggle had preceded dignity. "What have you done?" Mom asked, not loudly. She didn't need volume. She never had. Her eyes were clear as glass over water that moves too fast to see through. "I brought Grandma to the hospital," I said. I felt very young saying it, as if I'd also say, "And I washed my hands." "You humiliated us," she replied, a verdict dressed as an observation. "Do you have any idea what you've started?" The officer stepped between us by stepping nowhere at all. "Ma'am," she said evenly, "we're going to talk about your mother's care in a separate room. Your daughter will be with her grandmother." "My daughter," Mom repeated, taste testing the word as if it had changed recipes. We were doing our best. Something old and wild lifted in me. "Your best has a padlock," I said. My father's flinch was small, a wind in a wheat field. He tried first. He always tried first. "It's been hard," he said, and the word hard slid around the edges of everything it needed to touch and didn't. The officer's gaze met his, not unkind. "Caregiving is difficult," she said, making the word hold still. "Locking someone in a basement is unlawful." We all stood with that sentence between us. It had weight. It had a center of gravity. It rearranged the furniture in the room. A nurse pushed out a cart. We parted to let it pass as if choreography could save us. Mom's hand flexed like it wanted to find a thing to smooth and couldn't. "I didn't want her to wander," she said, and the syllables of "didn't" wanted to be cried over, but she doesn't cry. She falls, she forgets, she screams. What was I supposed to do? "Ask for help," I said, not as accusation, but as inventory. "We did," she snapped. "From you." The "you" had years attached to it. Bedtimes and school forms and casseroles you eat cold over a sink because the day forgot you. But you have your life. The shame rose hot and familiar. It always knew the stairs to my face. "I brought food," I said softly. The smallest defense is sometimes the truest. Dad rubbed his temple the way he had when budgets didn't balance. "We were overwhelmed," he said. "No one told us there were options. We thought this was temporary, safer until—" Safer? The word left me round and stunned. There was a bucket. He closed his eyes. "I know," he said, and I believed him. Knowing is a currency that buys very little after the fact. The officer tilted her head toward a conference room. "Please," she said to them, "we'll speak privately." To me, "You can stay with your grandmother." Mom glanced toward the corridor, where a nurse was wheeling a linen cart past the half-open door to Grandma's room. Something broke then. Nothing like glass. More like an old hinge that needs oil. "I need to see her," she said, voice flattening into something childlike and dangerous. "You will," the officer assured, "after we speak." They went. The door shut on the gentle click hospitals prefer to drama. I stood a moment in the leftover air, then turned toward Grandma's room. The curtain made a soft sound as I moved it, a breeze pretending to be fabric. She was awake. "There you are," she said, like I'd gone to fetch something from the garage, not dignity from the dark. Her hand found mine in the bedclothes the way a bird finds a branch it trusts. "They're here," I said. "The police are talking to them." She studied my face, mapping the weather. "Your mother will try words first," she said, not unkind. "Then she will try silence. Then she will try history. Don't go with her." "I feel cruel," I admitted. "You feel clear," she corrected. Cruel would be letting the door swing shut again. If you are over 65 and reading this, you know the wisdom of that sentence. If you're younger, tuck it into your pocket for later. And if this moment gave you language, click like so I can find you again in Arc 4. The conference room door opened after a while. that was both long and just enough. My parents emerged rearranged, smaller around the eyes, a little more porous. The officer spoke low to the social worker, then to the nurse, then to me. Your grandmother will be admitted. There will be a protective order concerning her placement. We'll keep you updated on the legal process. For tonight, she remains here. You can stay. Thank you, I said, because gratitude is a muscle worth exercising even on a day when everything hurts to lift. Mom stood near the foot of the bed. She looked at Grandma the way you look into a mirror held far away. Mother, she said, voice stripped of its ornaments. Daughter, Grandma answered, the title both an address and a diagnosis. Mom started and stopped. She doesn't like to begin sentences she can't end on her own terms. She tried a different hallway. It got away from us. Grandma pressed her lips together, then opened them on the smallest of smiles that had more mercy in it than I would have found. It did, she agreed, and now it won't. Silence can heal or haunt. This one did a little of both. Dad moved first. He took off his glasses and cleaned lenses that didn't need it, a ritual as old as me. We're going to cooperate, he said to the officer, to the room, to the ceiling tile that had been replaced with one shade too bright. We want to make it right. You can't, I said, too quickly, then caught myself. You can make it better. He nodded as if I'd handed him a tool he'd been pretending he'd lost. Better, he repeated. Mom's eyes flicked to me, then away. You should have told us what you were planning, she said, reaching for a world where her permission had been a required stamp. If I had, I answered. Would she be here now? Her mouth made a shape that wasn't yes or no, just a letter from an alphabet that hadn't been invented when she learned to speak. The social worker returned with forms, consents, releases, words that make rooms behave. We'll arrange for a safe placement, she said. There are options, nearby. We'll also do a home assessment. Someone will be in touch. The officer added, We'll take a formal statement from you tomorrow, if you're able. She meant me. I nodded. Are we under arrest? Mom asked, and the hour did something odd to the question, made it both melodramatic and very small. Not tonight, the officer said. Tonight is safety. I felt my ribcage loosen its belt one notch. Grandma yawned, the kind that starts in the jaw and travels to the eyes. Go home, all of you, she said, bossy in a way that put furniture back where it belonged. Let the people who know what they're doing do it. Come see me in the morning with decent coffee. The stuff here tastes like a secret. We laughed, all three of us, in stunned little bursts. Relief has silly edges. They left in pairs, the nurse with the chart, the social worker with the forms, the officer with her partner. My parents drifted toward the door. Mom paused. Can we? She gestured at the space near Grandma's hand. 2 minutes, the nurse permitted from the hall, not unkindly. Mom took Grandma's fingers. I'm sorry, she said, and I believed she meant it, which isn't the same as it being enough. Dad put his hand on the blanket where her ankle made a small mountain. He didn't trust his voice, which for once was wisdom. When they were gone, the room settled. Machines made their polite ping. Grandma closed her eyes. Sit, she said, without opening them. Tell me something ordinary. I told her about the woman in the cafeteria who put too much ice in my cup and then winked and said, I always do that when I'm nervous. About the volunteer who arranged the same 3 magazines differently every hour, convinced that this time someone would read them. About the child in pink socks who waved at every adult like a mayor on a float. We fell asleep like that. Her in a bed that at least knew its job, me in a chair with a betrayal of a cushion. At 3:14 a.m., I woke to the whisper of wheels, a custodian mopping the hallway with strokes so smooth they could have been music. I thought of the basement floor, cold, gritty, unforgiving, and closed my eyes until the image blurred back into the tile in front of me. Morning moved in gently. Sun found the blinds and put stripes on the sheet. A nurse with a coffee perfume said, "Vitals look good." The doctor returned with a face that had slept. The social worker held a brochure that for once did not feel like a lie. Photos of windows, real ones, gardens with chairs that had cushions not meant to punish, a program director with a voice that sounded like someone's aunt, not a marketing video. "There's a room," she said. "It's not fancy, but it's clean, and the staff is—" She searched for a word that had not been ruined. "Present." "Present is everything," Grandma said. "Where is it?" 10 minutes away, the social worker said, "with visiting hours that are mostly when you need to." I signed what I could sign. Grandma signed what bore her name. We tucked her blue scarf next to the pier photo a nurse had set on the tray table like a relic. When transport came, the orderly spoke to Grandma as if she were the point of the morning, which she was. Mom appeared in the doorway in yesterday's blouse, the color of effort. "May I ride along?" she asked no one and everyone. The social worker said, "There's room for one family member," and both parents looked at me. "You go," I told Mom. She blinked, startled by a permission she hadn't earned. "I'll follow with coffee that deserves the name." Grandma gave me a look over the blanket edge that said, "You're still my kid, and also not." "Get the kind in the brown bag," she said. "Not the shiny kind. The shiny kind is all hat and no cattle. If you laughed, you're my people. Leave a little in the comments. I'll know you got to this part." I drove after the van with a bag of croissants that shed flakes of apology in the passenger seat. The facility sat under big trees that had decided long ago to keep the building in the shade in summer and to let it have sunlight in winter. The lobby smelled like lemon oil and something sweet that wasn't trying too hard. A woman at the desk looked up and said my grandmother's name first, then mine. That order mattered to me. We settled her into a room with a window the size of a good thought. The bed adjusted with a sound that meant comfort in a language my ears already knew. A CNA named Nora, who wore earrings shaped like tiny leaves, showed us the call button like it was a magic trick. "Press and we appear," she said. "Not ghosts, people." Grandma smiled, and the skin around her eyes remembered how to be kind to itself. Mom sat in the corner chair like a guest in a house she used to own. She held the coffee as if it might accuse her. Dad arrived with a plant I recognized from our kitchen windowsill. "It likes east light," he said to no one in particular. Nora set it in the right place with a nod that said, "See, we do east here." The director came by with paperwork that read like plans instead of punishments. Physical therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Music on Saturdays if you liked it. Silence if you didn't. "You can bring familiar blankets," she told Mom. "Photos. We have rules about candles." "No. But if there's a scent she likes, we can put a drop on a cotton ball and tuck it near the pillow." "Cinnamon," I said. And Mom and I looked at each other with the exact same memory and the pain that comes with that kind of sameness. By noon, Grandma had dozed twice and woken twice and said 3 times, "This will do." Each time she said it, a splinter worked itself out of my palm I hadn't known had been there since I was 10. In the hall, the officer called with updates that sounded like a textbook, written by people who had decided to make the world boring and safe. Protective order, home assessment, mandated reporting had been fulfilled, interviews scheduled. The phrase, "conditions of release," that made me think of rain finally doing what it was meant to do. Fall. We went home that afternoon, not to the house of the basement, but to our separate roofs, where the air didn't name us wrong. I slept for 9 hours and woke to a kind of silence I recognized as rest, not threat. On my phone, a text from an unknown number. "This is Nora. Your grandmother asked me to tell you the cinnamon toast at dinner was a success." A photo followed. A plate with crumbs arranged like a map of a small country where the borders were kind. I cried in the good way. the way that waters something. Endings are not clean. They don't march in with trumpets. They seep like light through old curtains until you realize the room has changed and you don't know exactly when. Weeks passed after the hospital night. Grandma remained in the new facility, where windows opened and beds hummed with adjustments instead of creaks. She grew stronger, legs remembering how to walk more than a hallway, voice steadying into its old shape. The first time I saw her shuffle down the corridor with the physical therapist at her elbow, she lifted her chin toward me like a queen disguised in house slippers. "Told you I'd get out," she said, and I nearly fell into laughter and tears at once. The hearings began quietly. Courtrooms don't look like television. They look tired. Beige walls, microphones that squeal if you breathe wrong, clerks tapping at keyboards. My parents sat with their attorney, dressed in their best apologies. Dad in a suit that fit everywhere except his conscience. Mom in a navy dress that looked like respectability. The words spoken were long, legal, heavy with statutes. But the photos told the real story. The padlock, the mattress, the bucket. You could feel the air change each time the images appeared on the monitor. My mother's face barely moved. My father shifted in his seat like his skin itched. They pled to terms that let them walk home each night, but not without strings, community service, counseling, mandated classes with titles like elder care realities, and legal limits in family care. I thought of them sitting in a classroom, fluorescent lights buzzing, while a stranger explained what kindness looks like, as if it were algebra. "Do you think they'll change?" I asked Grandma later. She tilted her head. "People don't change all at once," she said. "They learn costumes. Sometimes, if they wear the right one long enough, it becomes skin. Sometimes it doesn't." The town reacted the way towns do, with whispers that sounded like weather. At the grocery store, Mrs. Cahill pressed a coupon into my hand like it was comfort. At the bakery, the woman slid an extra cinnamon roll into the bag without comment. Others turned away too quickly in the frozen aisle, ashamed of their own curiosity. Our neighbors raked leaves faster when I walked past, as though noise might drown out questions. It was both humiliating and liberating to have the secret out. No more pretending Grandma was at Elm Ridge. No more polite nods at family dinners where she was too tired to join. The truth had cracked open, and though it hurt, the air was cleaner. If you've ever lived through a scandal in a small place, you know. People talk, then they move on. And sometimes the best survival tactic is to let them. If this part resonates, leave a comment. I'd like to know I'm not alone in navigating the echo of other people's tongues. The first holiday came quicker than I was ready for. Thanksgiving. Grandma's facility invited families to join in the dining hall, tables decorated with paper turkeys folded by schoolchildren. The smell of roasted vegetables and sage butter drifted through the air, honest and unpretentious. I arrived with a pumpkin pie from the bakery, store-bought, unapologetic. Grandma was already at a table near the window, a plaid shawl around her shoulders, her eyes bright. When she saw me, she raised her fork like a flag of truce. Then I saw them, my parents, standing awkwardly at the edge of the hall, holding a Tupperware container of cranberry sauce as if it were a passport. For a moment, I thought I might choke on my own breath. Grandma waved them over. "Sit," she commanded. Old authority, polished by decades. They obeyed, as though she still ran the family kitchen. The meal began with silence, then shallow conversation. Weather, sports, the new pharmacy opening near town. My hands trembled as I passed the bread basket. Finally, Grandma cleared her throat. "This year," she said, "I am grateful for light that comes through windows." Mom's fork stilled. Dad stared at the sweet potatoes. The sentence landed like scripture. We ate the rest of the meal carefully, as if chewing too loudly might break the fragile bridge. Later, as we walked to the car, Mom touched my arm lightly. "Thank you for allowing us." I turned to her. "It's not me you need to thank." She nodded, small, almost childlike. I know, letters became our truce. Mom wrote first, stiff apologies layered with explanations. I wrote back without erasing my anger. Over time, her words softened. She confessed how terrified she'd been, of hospitals, of strangers judging, of being seen as a failure. Fear made me cruel, she wrote once. I thought if I locked her away, I was locking away the evidence that I wasn't enough. Dad's letters came slower, shorter. I should have spoken, he wrote. I chose quiet instead. I see now that quiet can be violence too. The admission cracked something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a loosening of the stone lodged in my chest. If you've ever tried to rebuild with people who broke you, you know the delicate choreography. Forgiveness doesn't arrive on command. Sometimes it arrives in letters, sometimes not at all. If you've walked that line, share your wisdom below. It might help another reader take their next step. Christmas was gentler. We gathered in Grandma's room, where a small tree glowed with soft white lights. She wore a scarf I'd knitted with clumsy hands, and she pretended not to notice the dropped stitches. Mom brought cookies, snickerdoodles, slightly overbaked. Dad strung paper snowflakes on the curtain rod, his big fingers surprisingly careful. We didn't talk about the basement. We didn't need to. The decorations, the tree, the shared coffee, these were not absolution, but they were new soil. Sometimes new roots don't need the old ground. At midnight, as I drove home through the quiet streets, snow beginning to fall, I thought of that locked door. How it had been a prison, yes, but also the place where I finally chose who I would be. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a single act. It is a garment you try on. Awkward at first, the sleeves too long, the fabric stiff. You wear it for an hour, then take it off, convinced it doesn't suit you. But slowly, with use, it softens. Some days it fits better. Some days you can't bear it at all. But over time, it becomes less foreign. I didn't forgive them for the basement. That act stands alone, undeniable. But I forgave myself for being afraid, for waiting too long, for bringing soup instead of action sooner. And I began to forgive the child version of my parents, the ones who never learned what care was supposed to look like. That forgiveness didn't excuse what they did. It explained why repeating cycles is so easy, and why breaking them is so necessary. That forgiveness didn't excuse what they did. It explained why repeating cycles is so easy, and why breaking them is so necessary. Grandma once told me, "Love is simple, families are complicated." I used to think she was wrong. Now I think she gave me the only map I'll ever need. 1 year later, we gathered again, this time at my small apartment. Grandma sat at the head of the table, scarf bright against her sweater, hands steady as she lifted her glass. "To doors that open," she said. Mom whispered, "Amen." Dad nodded. I raised my glass too, my throat thick with everything unspoken. We ate, we laughed, carefully at first, then with more ease. The past didn't vanish, it never does, but it stopped being the only thing in the room. And later that night, as I washed dishes in the sink, warm water running over my hands, I realized something. The basement had been their shame, but it had become my courage. The act of opening that door, of refusing silence, was the beginning of my adulthood. If you've read through all 4 arcs, thank you. Your attention has been a kind of companionship. If this story moved you, leave a comment or a like. Stories only survive when they are carried forward, especially by readers who know what it means to keep silence too long. Grandma is safe. That's the only sentence that matters in the end. My parents and I, well, we live in a fragile piece stitched with effort. Some days the stitches hold, some days they fray. But I no longer mistake silence for love. And every morning, when I hear the kettle hiss, I remember the humming that once drifted through the vents, and I hum back, answering, not hiding.